Hey, if you're thinking, I barely have time to write, let alone start a podcast, I got you. My Start Your Author podcast checklist helps busy writers like you start a podcast without sacrificing your writing time. No more guessing or Googling. Starting is actually the easiest part of podcasting, and with this step-by-step checklist, you can fit it in over the next 6 weeks or even next weekend. Stop letting uncertainty hold you back. Grab your free checklist at the link below and get on your way to serving your target readers today. Are you launching your first book this year? My friend Rebecca George, host of the Radical Radiance podcast and author of 2 books now, is here to take us behind the scenes of her first book launch when she started pitching podcasts long before her traditional publisher's PR started. So today's episode is actually part of a longer 2-part conversation I had with Rebecca on episode 68, and I'll link that in the show notes too. And today you're going to hear Rebecca share how soon she started pitching podcasts, what to include in your pitch, and what she likes to see in a pitch herself as a podcast host. You're in for a treat today, so we're going to jump right into what Rebecca has to share. So a lot of people have heard me talk on the podcast about podcast pitching. It's definitely my passion. And the thing I love the most about what you did was you reached out to me. I mean, and you've always been on my list. I'm like, I got to get on Rebecca on the show and just pick her brain about podcasting and pitching her podcast. But you reached out to me 5 months before your before your book release. So that alone, it's like, wow, impressed me. But then this is something I'm a big advocate for. And so to see somebody really do it made so much sense to me, because it was like you reached out to me, but it wasn't just like a canned pitch. I mean, you had your canned information in there you have to share, but it was totally, this is your podcast, Kim, and this is exactly what I could bring to your listeners. And so, it was only for my show. Like, you could not have pitched that same thing to anybody else. It was
That's right.
That really stood out to me. And I know it stands out to you as a host. And so I just want you to talk through that. Like, first, let's talk about how important it is to really think about promoting and pitching early, no matter how you're publishing. Because I know you're with a traditional publisher and they've hired a PR firm. So here Rebecca was reaching out to me, 5 months ahead of time before the PR firm was probably even anywhere near getting involved. So talk about how important that is.
Yeah. Okay. I first want to admit to you publicly, Kim, that I was really nervous about pitching you because I'm a listener of your show. I know how passionate you are about podcast pitching and equipping people in that way. And so if you knew the number of times I read the email that I sent to you before I sent it, you would laugh. Because I'm like, okay, if I do no other pitch right, I have to do Kim's pitch right. And so anyway, that will make listeners laugh.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Everybody knows how I feel about all that. So you did an amazing job.
Yes. Well, thank you. And so, okay, here's the thing. I am so aware of my place as a first-time author. This is my first book, right? And so I know even myself as a podcast host, by the time I pitched you, again, like you said, I was about 5 months ahead of my launch. But for Radical Radiance, my own show, I was already booking into Q2 by that point. And so I'm thinking, all right, if I'm already booking into Q2, then who knows, the number of people who I'd love to be a guest on their show are already planning at least that far out in advance. And so,
hey, Rebecca, let me ask you real quick just to clarify. Yeah. So when you say you were booking into Q2, was that the actual interview or was that when the interview would air?
Good question. So for Radical Radiance, I was already booking shows that would come out, would release and go live in Q2 last November.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Right? Let's clarify for our listeners. Yeah, this was last November. Yeah.
Yes, that's very helpful. And so I just started thinking through, okay, I know I'm a first-time author. I'm not quite sure if my publisher will invest in hiring a publicist or not, but I won't know that probably till 3 or 4 months before launch. So for listeners, most times if you do hire outside publicity, you're talking a couple months, 2 to 3 months, maybe before your launch, maybe a month, 2 if you're lucky after your launch. And so I just didn't want to sit around on my hands and wait,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I knew by January or February, there's no prayer. I'd get on a lot of the podcasts in April, my launch month, or, before or after, maybe in May, if I didn't go ahead and book at least some in advance. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, late last fall, before kind of the rush of the holidays, I just sat with kind of a list I'd been keeping and thought, okay, who are some of my peers in the podcast world who I feel like my book really would serve their listeners very well in a specific way. The great thing about the message of do the thing, and so listeners might be able to think about this with their own book, is I thought kind of topically
Mm-hmm.
about the book and what might specifically serve, the listeners of a certain show. For example, let's say the topic of our calling wasn't necessarily a fit, but maybe talking about striving would
Mm-hmm.
be. Well, I have a chapter on striving, right? And so I could serve up different types of content dependent on what the hosts, wanted to share about. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's an important thing to think about as you pitch as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as pitching in advance, I'm a huge fan of that, regardless of, if you hire outside help. I know by the time I started working with a publicist, I had booked about 40 shows
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they were able to come in and kind of complement what I was already doing, right? And
Yeah.
reach
Yeah.
out to some other shows that I hadn't contacted yet.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful because I think it's so important, especially when you are with a traditional publisher that has a publicist, is to collaborate with them. Like you've already talked about in the very beginning, like as an author, you're having to bring things to the table that you are going to do, on your own
Yeah.
platform. You've already built up a community of readers, so they have that expectation that Rebecca's going to do a lot of the marketing, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
is fact. And same with the PR. Like you can't just sit around and wait for that PR to happen because it is usually just in a significant window of time. And they're going to be so appreciative of, you've already reached out to some of these people and they may have done the same thing, but like you said, it would have been too late, and you wouldn't get
Yeah.
the book when you wanted it to be featured. Not that it can't be featured anytime, but there is a key window you're trying to hit there. So let's talk about, so now put your podcast host hat on, and I'm just going to grill you,
Yeah.
Rebecca, with a
Oh,
lot
I
of
love it.
questions about podcast pitching. So again, for you as a host, obviously, like you were just already talking about, the earlier, the better. So how would you, if somebody, their book's coming out, like like what you did with me, it's 5 months out or even longer, like how would you recommend somebody reaches out to you if they don't even have a book in their hand, right? And especially like if they're
Yeah.
self-published, it may be a while before they get something in their hand. It may be closer to that release date. How could they reach out to you and at least talk a little bit about the message they want to share without being able to provide you a book in hand?
Yeah, that's super helpful. The way that I worded it many times, and I appreciate when people word it this way to me, is, hey, I just want to go ahead and put this on your radar. I realize that we're several months in advance, but I know for myself, like we said, I'm already booking into next year. So as you consider your production calendar next year, I'd love for you to consider this message. And here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, even giving the caveat of I don't have a manuscript to show you today, but when I do, I can even send you a PDF watermarked manuscript that, won't be the final copy, but I'd love to just share the message with you so you can offer that as well. But there are certain ways I think to word it so that it's more of a, hey, I'd love to do you a favor by sharing this so far in advance so that even if, that your next couple months are booked, that's great because the book doesn't come out till April or whenever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's all in the way that you word it
Mm-hmm.
and also offering, to follow up when you have more to share with them, like an ARC advanced reader or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I love and just building with those relationships, right? I mean, it's just those little plugs like, hey, just kind of keep me on your radar. I love that. What do you prefer as far as the email? Do you like long emails, long emails that have everything you need in it, or a short email to kind of just check in with you and then send you long stuff later? What do you prefer from your pitches?
Yeah, I think there's a happy medium, right? Like there has to be enough information there for me to be able to discern, is this a good fit? So I love any unique angle that you can come up with. I think that's always helpful, even to just sit with, a dry erase board and brainstorm. How is this new, fresh content that my listeners haven't seen before, right? Let's go back to the example of comparison.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about comparison on my show multiple times,
mm-hmm.
but what if they came to the table with a unique angle on comparison, or maybe there's a story that, plays into that would encourage my listeners in a new way or something. And so I think coming to the table with a unique perspective matters a whole lot, which in today's world, you're probably not going to get to the table with a traditionally published book without a unique angle.
Exactly.
So you've already got that going for you if you've gotten to this place. And hopefully, no matter which path to publishing that you're taking, you're thinking about that. How do I share this in a way that maybe hasn't been done before based off what God's given me? And so I think that matters to me. I also like to see a good media kit, no matter which, if you're traditionally publishing or self-publishing, putting together a good media kit of, who you are, your bio, some of the topics that you talk about in the book that would be relevant to the conversation, some sample questions are helpful to see. I don't always go by them. As a podcast host myself, I prefer actually not to ask the questions that, 75 other hosts are going to ask you, or at least ask it in a fresh way. And so they can certainly provide inspiration while I don't typically go off of them verbatim. And so that's helpful. Even before, and you've seen this, Kim, before I started working with a publicist, I actually just kind of mocked up my own version of a media kit.
Yeah.
And so, taking a couple hours to do that can be helpful as a host kind of scans through your content.
Oh gosh, did you take lots of notes? I love what Rebecca shared about reaching out to podcast months ahead of your book launch with a personalized pitch to show the host you will truly be showing up for value to serve their unique listeners. And if you need some help with your podcast pitching strategy, I'll put a link in the show notes to my playlist of episodes to help you get started. Thanks again for tuning into Book Marketing Mania. And as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you reach and serve your readers one podcast at a time. See you then.